from Heritage Battle Creek. Mary Butler is with us. Morning to you, Mary.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am just great. Looking forward to a whole weekend of Memorial Day bliss, I hope. Hope I don't get struck by lightning.
Sounds like we're going to have summer for real this weekend, I guess.
160 years ago this week, the bookstore in Battle Creek had a hot book, and it was not about vampires.
It was Uncle Tom's Cabin or Life Among the Lowly. Went on sale at William Andrus's bookstore, just published by Harry Beecher Stowe, and the newspaper said it was in town, and they had heard good reports from the Eastern Press, but had been too busy to read it ourselves. But everybody else was reading it because in the first year of publication, 300,000 copies sold in the U.S., more than 1 million in Great Britain. And actually, through the whole 19th century, it's the second best-selling book of the century after the Bible.
I'll be darned.
So it was tremendously influential. Now, there's this famous quote from Lincoln that he supposedly said when he met Harry Beecher Stowe, "So this is the little lady who started this great war." Well, my guess is the quote's apocryphal, but it was probably reasonably close to the truth also, because the book did stir up tremendous agitation in the abolition community and opposition to the fugitive slave laws. It was a big deal when it was published. We're jumping ahead to 1893. Franklin Coulter, who was an artist at Albion College, he did the famous painting of Sojourner Truth meeting with Abraham Lincoln, and it actually was placed on display in the Michigan building of the Chicago World's Fair on June 1st. And, of course, it came back to Battle Creek after the fair was over, was hung in the sanitarium, and unfortunately burned when the sand burned. But there were some photographic copies of it taken, and that's all we have now, where the photographic images. The original painting was destroyed. It's summertime, and it's hot weather, and it's time to go to the lake. June 1st, 1896. Mrs. Una opened Lakeview, the brand new resort. She had bought the property from Richard Serby, who had actually opened an original resort back in 1875. And she bought it, and she remodeled the hotel, and she built a place for outdoor concerts, a whole amusement park, a merry-go-round, lit it with electric lights outdoors. It must have been very beautiful. And it was the favorite summertime resort for Battle Creek for many, many years. Just a couple years later, in 1898, the Battle Creek Gas Company was formed. Originally, there had been a firm set up in the 1870s to supply gas for street lights, heating and cooking, and basic industry. And it was purchased by David Henning of Chicago for $45,000. They had 9 miles of gas line. And in 1901, with the new company and the new name, they built the office at Madison in Michigan, which is now the Irma's Travel building, with a wonderful curved corner and the curved glass on the second floor. So that company's been around for a long, long time in Battle Creek. There's another company that really didn't last very long. It's one of my favorites, from 1902, right at the beginning of the cereal boom. The Battle Creek Rheumatic Sanitarium and Health Food Company. They were going to settle in Morgan Park, a whole new subdivision down south of Columbia, right off of Main Street. They were going to make a laxative breakfast food. Everybody needs one of those, and a hot cereal drink. They were going to build a whole new industrial park, a housing development. They had motor coach lines running from the city down to the lots to bring prospective buyers down. It never really took off and developed, but they had one favorite part I wish they had done. They proposed a college of digitology. And for those of us who just hit the dictionary to figure out what digitology is, it's horseshoeing, which you got to admit in 1902 was not going to be a growth industry because of automobiles coming in. But there is one small remnant of the whole Morgan Park piece left. As you drive down the back road to the mall, and you go down Main Street right south of Columbia, there's a stone arch just beyond the river that's still there as an entrance to a store. That arch was the entrance to Morgan Park, and it was designed by a major Battle Creek architect, and it's still there. May 31st, 1903, a very big date in Battle Creek history, the brand new sanitarium building dedicated. There were excursions on the railroad to bring hundreds of people into the ceremony. Of course, the sand had burned in February of 1902, and they began the brand new building right away. And the brand new one was dedicated on May 31st. It cost $700,000, so it was a biggie. That's, of course, now what the 6-story facade on Washington Street is, that new building from 1903.
$700,000, that's what it cost to heat it in a month.
Just about now, yeah. It'll be about right. June 1st, 1910. I love this one. They had just opened a brand new high school, and the school board discussed the discovery that the dome on the new high school, planned as an astronomical observatory, couldn't be rotated because the proper equipment wasn't installed. And if you can't rotate an observatory, you can't use an observatory. So it was never used and eventually was taken off the top of the building. May 27, 1917, the unveiling of the Post Monument in Post Park. This was a monument to C.W. Post, who had died in 1914. It was paid for by the citizens of the city, not by any institution. And it originally faced downtown. It's, of course, the monument of Post sitting, facing all the buildings he had built in downtown, the Post Tavern, the Post Building, and so on. And this was what the citizens wanted to recognize, was his work in building up the downtown. Of course, when they put up the Sojourner Truth Monument in September of 99, they moved CW to the opposite end of the park, so now he's facing the Post Addition, which was his other great contribution to Battle Creek. This, of course, is Memorial Day weekend, and the one little bit of Memorial Day history. On May 30th, 1924, the American Legion plot at Oak Hill Cemetery was dedicated, and the first 6 veterans were buried there. And he had begun with a request from Roosevelt American Legion Hospital for a burial site for veterans. And, of course, it grew, and the last burial there was 1980. And there are vets in that plot from World War I through Vietnam, about 200 veterans buried there. Another military note, June 1st, 1950. The Fort Custer Hospital was closed as an economy measure. It was activated to take over the overflow of Korean War patients from Percy Jones. And it was then, of course, they closed it in June, and because of the Korean War, they had to reopen it in December of the same year, and it didn't finally close until 1953. So that was the final end of the Percy Jones Hospital institution in Battle Creek. One little side note that I've always been intrigued by, because we had so many orthopedic patients at Percy Jones, Battle Creek was supposedly the first city in the country to install wheelchair ramps in the sidewalks downtown to accommodate the Percy Jones patients. It wasn't everywhere, but apparently there was a route downtown through McCamley Park in that area and down Michigan that the Percy Jones guys would take, and on certain intersections they had little wooden ramps that they put up from the street to the sidewalk so they could negotiate the curbs, which I think is really kind of a cool idea. May 31st, 1982, the Fort Custer National Cemetery opened with a special Memorial Day ceremony. When they very first opened it, they called it a Cemetery for the Living by the designers. And they announced in that first year of use, before the whole cemetery was laid out, they were going to use the Fort Custer Post Cemetery, which was going to be incorporated into the new cemetery. It was going to be used as the original burial site. So the first parts of the National Cemetery were the Fort Custer Post Cemetery. We've mentioned several times it is Memorial Day weekend, and of course this began way back right after the Civil War. It began as Decoration Day, and it was a day to mark the graves of Civil War soldiers observed in the North. And there was no fixed date till 1868, when the General Order of the Army designated May 30th for the purposes of strewing flowers or otherwise decorating the graves of comrades who died in the defense of their country during the late rebellion. So obviously this was a northern holiday from the beginning. It was gradually accepted through all the northern states, and some of the southern states now do it, but they still celebrate a Confederate Memorial Day in some of the southern states. Battle Creek's first venture into Memorial Day was 1868. It was a spontaneous celebration. Local ladies, led by Mrs. Loyal Kellogg, apparently organized a service at the Methodist Church, then marched to Oak Hill, carrying flowers to lay on the graves of 4 unknown Civil War soldiers. And then the first full-scale Memorial Day parade organized ahead of time. The stuff was held in 1870. And the parades continued for several years. I love this one. In 1902, there were 2 rival parades. In the morning, there was the Secret and Fraternal Societies held a parade, and the GAR marched in the afternoon. Now, why they couldn't do it together, I have no idea, but apparently there were 2 basic parades that year. 1911 was the first 500-mile race in Indianapolis, which was all part of what we associate with Memorial Day weekend. The winner was clocked in at 80 miles an hour. And by 1939, at